Oh, finally, we're back at it again. We're tier listing Call of Duty Pros today, and the big difference today, the twist. We're tier listing all 48 Call of Duty Pros, but with their positions as well. So we'll be listing within main AR, flex, SMG in this video, and it's been a minute since I've uploaded, so we got a lot to talk about today. Obviously, coming off of Stage 2, the insane win with LAG, and heading into Stage 3. So hang with me on this intro because we have a lot to go through with how the context and how I rate these guys, and a handful of important things to talk about before we get into the actual rankings themselves. So please stick around for the intro. Let's go. Alrighty, so here are the categories, the template we're using for the video today. Obviously, we got the S through E tiers, SMG, Flex, Main AR, and let me tell you, it looks pretty nice. It was the most upvoted comment on the last video to do it sorted like this, so I thought, sounds like a fun time. I'm down to give it a go and see how it plays out. So the other thing I wanted to do was give a little bit of context into actually some of the tiers, and maybe hopefully provide a little bit more clarity on how I kind of think about this as well. So outside of the S through E tiers, here's maybe a different way to think about it. So here's maybe some other labels to maybe think about the tiers in this way. So at the top, you got the MVPs, the guys who are the most valuable players, the ones who impact their team and the game the most when they're on the map. Then you got like the championship level players, the players that can be on any team in the league and be an important, impactful player. Then you have the X Factor players, the guys who have huge upside that can take over games or have the big moments to find streaks, but are a little bit less consistent than those championship level players. Then you have the guys who, when they're on, you need them at their best. And when they're at their best, you can win championships. It's a little bit tougher to figure out and dial in on when those guys are dominating. Then you've got the bottom two categories, which are kind of the hot seat categories, maybe where teams could consider role changes, or where teams could consider potentially replacing that player for an amateur player or a different player around the league. And then of course, the two questions I always ask, one is if I'm building a team to win Stage 3, I guess the next event here is the Pro-Am, but the Pro-Am or Stage 3, which players would I want on my team? And then the next question is, if you had a team of 3 other league average players, which players would impact and change and improve that team the most? Obviously, we're taking into account Stage 1 and Stage 2 performances, but you can't just only base it off of like the stats or the in-game play. You have to take a pretty big perspective look and isolate the individual play from every single team and really try to attack it. There's no perfect way to do a tier list, but I think today we'll have some fun and put out a pretty good one. And one other thing for this video is that the gameplay you'll be seeing in this video could be a little bit weird. I'm gonna have to be using a lot more of the previous Stage 2 gameplays that aren't from the major, because the major's gameplays are getting copyrighted on YouTube by Activision. So unfortunately, if I'm gonna show the major 2 gameplay, I probably have to block out the top of the screen somehow, like maybe with like, I don't know, a black bar or stats. We'll see what I end up doing. But if I show any major 2 gameplay, it'll be because of that. Otherwise, you'll be seeing a lot of previous Stage 2 gameplay. That's one thing to consider as well. So without further ado, we can finally rank these Call of Duty Pros, so let's do it. Okay, so the first player we're ranking here, I mean, this is a pretty obvious one. He's an absolute unit on the sticks, but it is pretty interesting. We're ranking Cellium, and FaZe just officially announced that they are role changing Arcades and Cellium, but like realistically, Cellium hasn't been a flex for most of this year. It's really been Arcades doing that. He's been the guy picking up the SMGs, running the SMG, pulling it out on like Bocage more often. Cellium's been their main AR, so I'm ranking Cellium like a main AR. We're gonna be throwing him in the S tier. I mean, he's one of the best players in the game without a doubt. And one thing I do want to say is that I was playing out some of this before, and I want to keep the S tier pretty elite for this one. I think there's a handful of players who have separated themselves above the pack, and the rest of them are still in the mix right now. So keep that in mind while I'm ranking these guys, because I think it'll make more sense as we kind of get through it. All right, so next up is Jimbo. It's been a weird run for Jimbo. We saw some improvement in Search and Destroy from him this second half of Stage 2, looking a lot better than the beginning in his debuts. I still probably gonna put him inside the E tier because I want to see a little bit more from him inside the respawns and a little bit more consistency, especially with how he plays his life. But one thing's for sure is that he's a fast player. I mean, he flies around the map, and he's been doing a good job of finding those first bloods, getting information for Paris. So I can see the direction for Jimbo if he stays in the league and keeps grinding out and improving. But for now, we'll leave him in the E tier because of those respawns. So next up, we got Big Wake. And I mean, obviously it's a weird situation with his like position. I mean, technically he's an SMG. He basically flexes on some of the maps still, where he runs the AR like on Bocage, things on those lines. We'll count him as an SMG. I'll throw him inside the A tier. but it's been a weird run for him again, positional wise, but man, he can take over maps. Obviously, we know how good his gun skill is. The question is like, is he a kill whore? Or is it a little bit different than that? I definitely think it's a little bit different and more nuanced than he's a kill whore. But obviously there are times when their communication breaks down, and Big Wake's not known for his communication. So realistically, I think that part of his game could still be improved. But man, when he's in the zone, he takes over games, and that's evident, and we've seen that this year for sure. Big Wake is a world-class slayer, no doubt about it. So now we got Benjamin Bance, the purple assassin. And it's always a weird spot for me with Bance right now. I mean, obviously Toronto struggles. It's real tough with the Ultra, and their respawns are just disgusting. It hurts me to watch them play respawn right now. And so I think I gotta throw Bance inside the D tier. At this point, it's been really a struggle for him, really across all 3 game modes, to find that slang. His gunfights just haven't been coming through the way that we would have expected them to come through this year. The coordination, the teamwork, it's been just nowhere in the realm of what it was last year for Ultra as a whole. I think that's probably gonna be pretty reflective in all of their rankings right now on this tier list, because it's kind of hard to avoid because none of them are playing that well. So we'll leave Bance in the D tier for now. It's just a tough spot to be in, man. It really is. So Hook is up next. Talk about a tough team to rank. LAG. I mean, how do you weight their major 2 success with Spark just joining into the lineup? It's really hard to say. Obviously, they dominated Search and Destroy, and we saw Hook take over a handful of respawn games. And that grand final, Hook was an absolute menace on the map. So I'm not exactly sure where I want to rank Hook. I'm thinking the B tier probably would make the most sense as a main SMG. And the other thing with Hook is, like in years past, he's kind of been this S&D unit, an absolute beast. This year, it's been weird. I mean, obviously up until the stage 2 major, I mean, LAG was horrible in S&D. So that complete U-turn to go from one of the worst S&D teams to literally the best one by a mile, not dropping a map, like 10-0, insane. But normally Hook's like a first blood beast. This year, that's not the case. He actually has like one of the lowest first blood percentages in the CDL, which probably has to do a little bit with playing with Asum, who's an absolute first blood unit this year. That's something to keep your eye on, I think, for Hook moving forward. He did play great. I could see an argument for the A tier, but I'm gonna leave him in B for now. Next up, we got John, the other SMG for the Paris Legion. And I mean, I think I gotta throw him inside the E tier. I mean, I could see the argument where people could say like, you know, him and Bance have kind of been in the same tier. It's not that indistinguishable. I get that for sure. But we haven't seen John ever be consistent in the CDL. So I'll give Bance a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt. And the Ultra have at least had more success in S&D. And Bance has been at least a little bit better in Search and Destroy. So that's kind of the nuance there. But even though we've seen him make some nice clutches this year, and there have been some good moments for sure. Like, then that's the thing about this league is we're splitting hairs with tier listing any of these players. But I think for now, we'll leave John inside E. Hydra is up next. And I think this is where the S tier, keeping it smaller, is going to come into play here. I'm going to put Hydra inside the A tier, even though he's like the first player out of the S tier for me. Like I said, I'm keeping it shorter or smaller in this video. It'll probably make more sense as we go along in the rankings. But obviously, Hydra's gun skill is about as good as anyone's. He wins his ones for sure. I think we'll probably only see him get better and better and more dominant as this New York Subliners team moves throughout the season. We just heard that they're trialing some players. So who knows? They could have a roster change heading into stage 3 or into the Pro-Am. Hard to say still. Regardless, Hydra's a unit, one of the best players in the game, and he's in the A tier for sure. So here's a player who's really interesting, Draza. So they just announced that he's flexing now. So I guess we can rank him inside the flex category. It's kind of, you know, in this video, I'm not really taking too much into account, maybe with the main ARs more than the flexes with like their positions and how they relate to each other. But realistically, I think I got to throw Draza inside the D tier. I mean, I could see an argument for the E tier, but I'm not sure which flex right now. I think the flexes could be potentially more grouped up than the other positions because the flexes are in a weird spot right now across the league. Across all 3 game modes, it's been a struggle for Draza. And in my opinion, if they were to make a roster change, I think it would be for Draza right now, but it makes sense that they're not making one and instead swapping roles with Kenny and Draza. So it is kind of a weird spot to be in. He gets separated from his team, and I want to see a lot more from him in the coming weeks before I'm convinced that he should stay in the starting lineup. Even though we've seen him be a world-class slayer in the past, I mean, maybe at the beginning of stage 1 inside Control, but really that's all dating back to last year in Cold War. So we got to see some prove it time for him now inside of a Vanguard here heading into stage 3. So Attacked's up next, and he's a pretty interesting player because I've been really happy overall with how Attached has played this year, which is interesting because it hasn't translated at all to like rocker success, which is really tough. And that's a tough spot to be in for any player, especially when they're in pretty tough turmoil right now and likely to make a roster change, you know, in the next week or two. So overall, I think he's near the top of the B or the bottom of the A tier. I think I'm gonna leave him in the B tier for now. I really, really like how Attached has played. The respawn improvement for him has been really impressive. And he's really been the only player that I think has shown like the really high upside on a more consistent basis inside of respawn. He's a beast. So up next, I mean, Shotzzy, come on now. We all know he might just be the best player in the game right now. But man, going back and watching some of these clips of Shotzzy, it's just insane, especially his Search and Destroy. With how he's impacted the game in S&D, finding first bloods, playing his life. I mean, finding a first blood and getting away with your life is the most important thing, especially if you're an SMG. It's the best and most impactful play in Call of Duty. And Shotzzy's been debatably the best at it so far in the CDL. And you pair that with how good he's been in respawn still too, even as an SMG where, I mean, even in this game, SMGs have been in a tough spot when it comes to respawns as a whole. But I love Shotzzy and how he plays this game. He's an absolute unit without a doubt. So Kleenex is up next. Tough spot for Kleenex to be in right now. Again, with the Ultra, he's right around this C or D tier, probably with right now with how the Ultra are playing. I think I'm gonna put him just slightly ahead of Bance, even though statistically it's like he hasn't been that much better than Bance. We've seen the first blood and fast pace upside of Kleenex inside of Search and Destroy. We've also seen him at times this year take over games. Even when he was sick, he had some massive games like on Bocage and things along those lines, where we haven't really seen that type of dominance at all from Bance since like maybe the kickoff event. I wouldn't have any problem with somebody putting him inside the D tier, but I think this ranking will make sense as the farther we go through. So Kenny is up next. If someone put him inside the E tier, I wouldn't mind with how bad it's been for Kenny in stage 2. I mean, the difference between Kenny in stage 1 and stage 2, I mean, we haven't seen very many players have like go from having such a great stage 1 where I really thought like after stage 1, he was fantastic, like top 12, 10 type player. And then in stage 2, it was horrible. Like one of the worst players in the league in stage 2. I would probably throw him inside the D tier right now. It's a tough spot to be in for Kenny. I think he can improve and definitely climb his way back up towards that B tier type player in stage 2. But I'm gonna have to see it first with how bad he was. He's one of the worst S&D players right now. It's been real bad for Kenny. We will definitely see. Gravity up next. And I think I'm gonna have to throw Gravity inside the E tier of the main ARs. I'm kind of body in Paris right now. But I mean, you know, we still got Donnie to go. Come on now, Donnie, beast. But something's weird with Gravity in this game. I think it feels a little slow, a little disconnected. I thought Gravity would be a little bit of a more like dynamic player than what we've seen so far from him. And so that's been a little bit surprising. I still think there's some potential with this Paris roster, even though I'm kind of bodying 3 of them right now. Especially in control, I'm a little bit like concerned or confused with how Gravity plays with his teammates inside of control. It feels a little bit off. And that's something I definitely want to keep my eye on here as we move into stage 3 for sure. Okay, so Priesta is up next. Man, it's a tough go for Priesta. Like the fact that I'm even considering throwing him in the E tier again is like, it's mind-blowing that we're at this point, but I think we are at this point. I think Priesta's an E tier player right now. It's been going real bad for him, and if I had to guess, he'd be the player that probably misses the cut or gets replaced first if I'm the rocker, considering like what Standy brings in Search and Destroy still. It's just been a tough go for Priesta. I really hope he rebounds because he's one of the best, nicest, chillest players in the league. And so I really want to see him, you know, bounce back for the rocker's sake and for his sake. But I'm not sure if we're going to see that type of bounce back again in Vanguard. I mean, Priesta, even throughout Cold War, there were questions about whether or not he could keep up. And, you know, then we saw it at stage 5 major. We haven't really seen it since. There's just not that much to write home about with Priesta right now. So Abizi is up next. Interesting play right here. I mean, he's been a lock inside the S tier for a while now, but man, stage 2 was probably the most inconsistent Abizi we've ever seen in his career, dating back to like the first few weeks of him being in the COD League or in the Call of Duty World League in BO4. I mean, definitely surprising. He seems to be just a little bit disconnected and not able to play his life as well as we've seen him play his life in the past. Like normally you see a BZ find one and then dip away and then play his life for a second, find that second. Those two pieces haven't really been converting. Seems like he's getting traded at a way higher rate than he has in the past. I mean, maybe that's a little bit to Simp's benefit in this game, but I don't think that's really the narrative. I think it's a little bit overblown. I think it's just more that a BZ hasn't been playing as well as we normally would want to see a BZ play. I'm going to throw him in the A tier, which is surprising. I know, but I want to see the BZ of S&D dominance that we've seen throughout the past 2-3 years. And in this game, we haven't fully seen it yet. We see those moments, those flashes where he pops like the 3-piece, hits the great route, makes the plays, especially on Tuscan. We've seen that a lot with him playing towards A side and pushing up and getting really aggressive. The patience hasn't been as obvious in this game. And I think that's where we're going to see S&D and how BZ plays with his teammates a little bit better, I think, here heading into stage 3. So I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up back in the S tier, but for now, we'll leave him inside A. Illy, up next. A tier flex for sure. I mean, Illy has been very, very good. There's moments and some of his decision making can be sometimes a little bit aggressive or inconsistent, but overall, you gotta be happy with how Illy represents and plays and dominates games, and he can definitely take over, and we've seen that this year with Optic for sure, regardless. And like I said, flexes are gonna be interesting. I think I'm gonna have them a little bit more bunched together than you might expect. So we'll keep rocking and rolling. This thing, it'll be more like, oh, well, speaking of flexes, we got Arcides up next, who's again, now a flex after the role change from FaZe. And I'm in the same boat. I'm gonna put both of them inside A. And you might be wondering like, wait, Illy, Arcides, who else is there at flex? You're gonna have to see. I mean, again, Arcides, he can do it all across all the game modes. He's so reliable. In a true flex role now, it'll be interesting to see if we see an even more dominant Arcides, especially on some of on the maps like Tuscan. Gizmo, oh, now we're having the run of flexes here. So this is what I mean. It's a weird spot for Gizmo. He's either at like the back of the A tier or at the top of the B tier. And so I think I'm gonna put him more kind of like the top of the B tier right now. Again, stage 1 Gizmo was one of the best players in the game. He was insane. Stage 2, it's been a little bit more inconsistent. He had the trip back home. He had some real struggles. And so we'll see if he can start rebounding here towards stage 3. But we see him be an absolute slayer. I mean, he likes the chow, and him and Sib have that relationship, that similarity where they just kind of go at it once in a while and just take that chow. So I think we can see a little bit more patience from Gizmo at times inside of a few gunfights. And if he can start harnessing that, he'll be one of the best players in the game. He has natural talent for days. And I'm excited to see what Gizmo can do here heading into stage 3. Paul X is up next. Interesting one. I know they might be trying to replace him, or they don't necessarily love how he plays. I think control is probably the problem for Paul X right now. If I'm New York, I mean, I'd really only be trialing out Neptune. Even at that point though, Neptune played so well, it's hard to say. We'll talk about that on the podcast here next, coming out tomorrow. But I'm gonna put Paul X in the C tier. I love how he plays in Search and Destroy. I know he's a little bit slower of a player, and I haven't loved how much slower he's played in this game. And that can maybe be a little bit of the problem with some of the disconnect with this team. But I really think that Paul X could be an absolute unit. And inside of Hardpoint, I think we are only seeing the beginning of how good Paul X can be in this game. I'll leave him in C tier for now, but I really, really like Paul. Tej, I mean, talk about, we really are on the run of flexes here. Tej, another interesting one, a player who I underestimated. I'm going to throw him in the B tier. I mean, I think some people would want to put him in the A tier. I think I'm listing these guys a little bit differently than some might expect. Tej is so interesting. Inside control, especially since the debut of Tix, he's been a beast. And like I said, he's one of the players I've been like most wrong on heading into this year. I really thought it would be a while before we saw Tej kind of back to like World War II form, or like a really, really elite form. But man, he's been awesome in that flex role for Boston. Really impressed with what Tej has brought to the table. And in stage 2, you could argue that Methods and Tej are like the two most valuable players for Boston, which was not something I had on my radar for their success like recipe heading into stage 2 and stage 3 for sure. So it's been really awesome to watch. All right, so up next is Neptune, and tough spot to be in for Neptune because again, like, has he been horrible recently? No, but he was also horrible at the beginning of the year. So I think kind of heading into stage 3, he's probably in that D tier type situation where like we got to see more from him to actually believe he's like legit, but he has looked pretty good recently. and is on the uptrend to kind of hit that next level pretty soon here. So I could see someone have him higher. I could also see someone have him lower. He's probably one of the tougher players to grade right now because we have a pretty small sample size overall of how he plays. But regardless, pretty happy with the improvement we've seen from Neptune, and hopefully he can keep it up heading into stage 3. So now we got Pred, and again, Pred and Sib are both just so tough to rank because it's like at their best, they're going toe to toe with Optic, and they're beating Optic on like Bocage. At their worst, they're losing to Paris, you know, at the stage 1 major, and it's been an inconsistent bag of performances from Pred and Sib and from Seattle as a whole. And so they are a tough team to overall rank. He's kind of on that fringe of A and B tier. I think for now, I think I'd rather have Pred than Hook, and probably enough of a difference for there to be a tier break. It's also anticipating a little bit of improvement here throughout this break heading into stage 3 and with the Pro-Am. I really do think Pred's gonna be a pretty good spot here. I mean, his gun skill is insane. It's on par with some of the best in the game. And we've also seen him do it across all 3 game modes in Slang and in Search and Destroy, probably where we could see a little bit more improvement recently. But we've also seen him make some insane plays in S&D, and I think he's only getting smarter and more patient. And that was a big takeaway for me during stage 2, especially the stage 2 major, overall with how he's played there. So I really like Pred and excited to see how he plays moving forward. So Major Maniac is up next. I would say he's definitely on the bottom side of the main ARs. It's been a little bit of a struggle. And again, like I could see an argument for him being dropped or at least on the hot seat for Minnesota right now. And so overall, I kind of agree with that kind of sentiment where it's like he does play really slow. He has kind of lived up to a little bit of his like phase Modern Warfare type of stereotype where it's been pretty dang slow, especially in control. And I think there are some pacing problems with how fast Standy wants to play. And I think something's going on there, which is not fully meshing with Priesta as well there. I think Major Maniac's fine. He's a little bit better than Gravity, but they're pretty similar players overall. That's why I throw him in the D tier, I think, overall. So speaking of man-ARs, who dominate, Dashy is up next. I mean, obviously, he's an S tier. He's one of the 2-3 best players in the game right now. I mean, there's an argument probably between the 3 guys that are up there right now. Cellium, Dashy, and Shotzzy is the top probably 3 players in the game right now. And Dashy has a really good argument. I mean, one thing's for sure is he is the best control player in the game by a mile. It's not really close. It seems like every single map he's dropping like a 1.4, absolutely frying, leading the lobby in damage per life, damage per 10 minutes. Not to mention his patience is just on a whole nother level this year versus what we've seen in the past. And like I said, it's like everything that you want like Sib or Gizmo to do a little bit better, it's like Dashy's doing at the best level right now. He's insane. So up next is Skies. And again, a weird situation for all of Florida. He's definitely a flex, but it's just always a weird situation with how much he uses SMGs and it can get a little bit different. One thing's for sure though, is that he can hang with the best in the game. I'm gonna throw him in the A tier as well. Just a really great player right now. I think I'm taking some liberties with some of the A tier and being a little bit more flexible, but again, I really wanted to keep the S tier like really elite with some of the best players in the game, kind of thinking in that MVP type of conversation right now. I don't have that many complaints with Skies. I mean, the biggest thing that everyone harps home on is the comms can get a little bit chaotic with Skies, which I do generally agree with some of those listens we hear, but the gun skills there, the Search and Destroy has definitely been there this year. And I'm really excited to see how good Skies can be here heading into stage 3. All right, so we're gonna start speeding this thing up because I just have a lot to say. It's been so long since I've posted a YouTube video. I just feel like it's all been bunched up in here, but we got Cammy up next. I mean, it's been a struggle for Cammy. Obviously, all of Toronto. I think I got to throw him in the D tier right now, which is crazy. The fact that we're at a point right now where Cammy's in the D tier with after him being like a top 5 type player last year. But man, there's just not any game mode where you can get that excited about him right now. It's tough out there for him. I don't really know what the solution is. They're the biggest enigma team without a doubt is Toronto, because I just don't know what the solution really is, especially in respawn. And Cammy hasn't been good in S&D either, and that's what's weird. I don't have as many answers as I'd like to have with Toronto, but that's where I'm at right now. I think Cammy is inside that D tier. So Envoy's up next. Weird spot for Envoy to be in because, yeah, he's been the best player on LA Thieves, but there's still a lot of problems there. So I'm gonna throw him inside the B tier, kind of in that, I think, Hook conversation, which makes sense. They've always kind of had this very similar play style and connotation with how they like to play. I mean, one thing's for sure is that when you look at like the adjusted damage per life and things along those lines for how players play, I mean, Envoy's been the best player on LA Thieves, and it's not really close. But we all knew that from watching the film itself or watching the games themselves. Envoy's very, very good, and I think he can end up inside that A tier, so keep moving here throughout the year. So Standy's up next. Weird situation for Standy as well. So Respawn's been real tough, especially hardpoint for Standy. It's not been good. It's been ugly. I can see the argument for him being like inside the C tier, but the one thing with Standy is that he is still so good at search and destroy. And I think that keeps him at least in the B tier, man. Because like the S&D X factor for him is the first bloods, the pace of play. When you find him playing his life, he's one of the best in the league at playing his life, finding those first bloods and not getting traded. And he just does such a good job of that. And that's, again, so valuable. Talking about similar conversation with Shotzzy. I think he's got to be in the B tier because of his X factor in search and destroy. But that's one of the weird things about the Rocker right now is that like Standy's so good in S&D, but he's just bad right now in Respawn. And you got Major Maniac and Priesta, and then Attach is great in Respawns. So this is kind of this weird dynamic of inconsistencies across all the individuals. So Slasher, up next. One of the toughest guys to grade, because it's like, where do you have him ranked? It feels like it's a pretty big drop off and like guaranteed success after Dashy and Cellium. Obviously, Thanos popped off in the stage 2 major, but before that, he wasn't great. I mean, he was probably like a C tier type guy before that. So it's like, I could see the argument for him being in B tier, but man, he was so, when you're that good at the stage 2 major and win, I gotta respect that. I mean, the S&D prowess in that game was in the stage 2 major was insane. The first bloods from him and from Spart. So I'm gonna leave him inside the A tier for now, even though I'm not convinced LAG is gonna keep this up. I mean, the question is, are they Toronto stage 2 last year, where they have this breakout and then they're a top team the rest of the year with top players the rest of the year? Or are they the Rocker stage 5, where they kind of just catch fire and make that losers bracket run at a major on LAN, and then it never really sticks out or really sticks together for the rest of the season? Hard to say. I lean more towards Rocker stage 5 than Ultra stage 2, but I do think that they're gonna be a little bit more consistent than Rocker last year. So that's, I guess, taking the middle of there. So Nero's up next. I mean, Nero's been good, but not great. I think you gotta throw him in a C tier. I think the S&D is probably the question mark for Nero, or overall the consistency, obviously. Like, we've seen the insane takeover moments on like Tuscan at the start of the games where he just catches fire, or like dropping 50 kills on Bokaj. But then there's times where it like disappears, goes double negative in control. Obviously it's tougher for SMGs overall, but then you also have in S&D, there's moments where he gets first blooded a little bit too often, or gets a little bit disconnected, or maybe gets a little bit aggressive. And so those are the things I want to see, a little bit more patience and consistency from him. I would say he's been a little bit better than Kleenex, so I could see the argument, like, you know, he's been better than Kleenex. I agree. He doesn't do anything like at an exceptional level right now on a consistent basis. So I think that's why he's a little bit below the B tier for sure. So up next, Simp. I'm gonna throw him inside the S tier for sure, although I do think Shotzi's been significantly better than Simp on a consistent basis. But man, we've still seen Simp take over games, and there's still that marquee Simp in there. And I think the S&D is only gonna get better and better as well. Simp's a beast. I don't gotta talk too much more about him. You know how good Simp is. So one of the most interesting players in the league is Methods, Zinni. KD wise, I mean, he's one of the best in the game KD wise. And that's what's weird, because against the top teams in the game though, it's been like a weird situation for Boston. Like, I get this weird vibe from Methods again against the top teams in the game. It's hard for me to even like, I probably need to go back and like rewatch all of their matches against the top teams in the game, like where they just haven't been able to pull them out. It comes off like Zinni just doesn't get as aggressive as he should in those games. I don't want to say he's like farming kills, because I don't think that's what he's trying to do, but I think it's kind of happening that way. KD wise, he's been very, very good. I'm going to throw him in the A tier because I do think he's doing a lot of really good things right now, but there's something weird about the gameplay that I haven't fully deciphered yet. And so that's where I'm at with Zinni right now. Dave Patty. I have no idea what to think about Dave Patty. I'm going to throw him in the D tier. Again, we're gonna try to go a little bit faster here. I really like some of the X factors he can bring on the map, and we've seen him take over some moments, like on that Berlin in the major. We saw him just take over and go nuclear. Sometimes we're in Search and Destroy where he catches fire and he's finding first bloods all day long, whether it's with a sniper or with the automaton. I like it a lot. We gotta iron that out a little bit more with Dave Patty moving forward. So now we got Donnie. Woo, Donnie. I mean, I think you got to throw Donnie in an A tier flex right now, man. I mean, it's a weird situation where like on Paris, he's dominating the leaderboards when it comes to damage and just cooking, and he's finding the kills. He's winning his ones too, though. That's the thing. Like, it's not just like this, oh, he's trading, the guy's weak. But like in these straight up gunfights where it's a one-on-one, hit your shots, Donnie's been doing it. I really do think that Donnie's a really good player in this game. I don't think it's just because he's putting up good stats, but I think like legitimately, he's making instinctual plays. He understands his game pretty well. I really wish he was in a better situation than he was right now on Paris. Vivid up next, another one of the toughest players in the game to rank. He's in a tough spot in control. Obviously, he got smoked on Gavutu this stage. They played so much Gavutu this stage, and he was getting bodied. I guess it's a tough spot for a guy like Vivid who wants to play fast and be aggressive. Play on Gavutu, I think it hurts his gameplay a lot. I could see someone putting him in the C tier. He's kind of on that fringe for me, but the S&D is a weird spot for me this year, because normally in his past, Viv has been a great S&D player. But I think a big problem for me, again, similar like the Abizi situation, but I think on a way worse level here, is that he just is not getting away with his life at all in Search and Destroy. Like, he might find the first blood, but he's just not playing his life. And so I really want to see him play his life better. So I'm going to throw him inside the D tier for now and rock and roll with that. Next, we got Asim. And again, so hard to rank, because before I probably have him in the B tier as like a solid player, but like we got to see more from him. My word, he dominated at the stage 2 major. I feel like you got to throw him in the A tier at this point because of how good he played. And like, I mean, you know, the goal is to win. I mean, like, you can't dock him for winning a tournament, but it's like, I do want to see him do it a little bit more than just that one weekend to feel really good about it. But he's been at least a very good player before that. So he's in the A tier for sure. I mean, I loved everything about how Asim played this weekend, and you gotta respect the passion, to say the least. So Octane up next. I have no idea what to do with Octane, man. What has happened with him in Respawn this year? I don't know. His S&D's been, you know, all right, like solid. I do like how he's cleaning up kills and playing a little bit better in S&D, finding a little bit more of those first bloods when they do get the first bloods at least. But it's been a tough go for LAT and Search and Destroy as a whole as a squad. I'm gonna throw him in the D tier. I mean, maybe he's the top of the D tier, and I could see I know some of you LAT fans are like, yo, Octane's in D? Like, are you kidding me? But like, his respawn's been bad, boys. It's been tough. And so he's probably one of the players I gotta fade down there for sure. So Sib is up next. And I mean, again, I think we're gonna kind of have a cluster of flexes here inside the A tier, and we're not gonna have any flex inside the S tier. So this is kind of what I'm saying. I think we're only gonna have 4 S tier players and no S tier flex. I don't think any of them have fully, I could see the argument for R-Cities or Illy. Like, if you wanted to do like R-Cities and Illy both in S, I could see that. But like, R-Cities and Illy haven't been on the take over the game MVP levels that, like, you know, Dashy or Cellium or Simp or Shotzzy have been on. So it's like, I don't feel comfortable putting any of the flexes currently in S tier. Sib's been very good. Again, similar conversation to Gizmo, but he's been a little bit more consistent slaying in stage 2, and they've had some big wins against some big time teams. So overall, I really am excited about Sib and excited to see what he can do here heading into stage 3. So Accuracy is up next. I think he's a C tier player. I think he's a C tier type main AR right now. He does a lot of things well, but nothing that great. And that's kind of the problem. Like, at least with Insight, who's up next, I probably will throw him in the same tier, even though Accuracy's been a more consistent respawn player. I mean, at least Insight's clutch ability, I would argue that Insight can be a little bit too slow and a little bit too isolated in Search and Destroy at times, which requires him to clutch 1v2s and 1v3s constantly. But man, you gotta respect his individual S&D play. He's a hard kill around the map, and I think that's where you gotta put Insight for now. So Mac is up next. Talk about a player I have no idea how to rank, because in respawns, we've seen Mac dominate. I mean, this weekend, or last weekend, bro, I mean, Mac on his flu game took over. And of course, you know, that's gonna leave an imprint in people's minds with how well he played against top teams like that. The problem is his Search and Destroy. And I don't think people are acknowledging enough how bad his Search and Destroy has been. And so for that reason, I'm gonna put him inside the B tier. And just overall with Mac, like, it's the first blood percentages and like how he plays at the beginning of rounds. It just feels a little off overall. And it seems like he's just not converting some of the first bloods he should be converting as an SMG on like maps like Tuscan and making those types of plays. All right, so we got a few more here. Spart is up next. And what do you do with Spart? I have no idea how to rank Spart at this point. I mean, based off of that one tournament, you may as well throw him in the S tier. The guy's a god. I mean, but it was one tournament. The S&D dominance was insane. I'm gonna throw him inside the B tier. I'm not gonna get too like twisted on like where you rank Spart. There's just not enough. There's not enough footage of him in a long enough period of time to really have a great ranking for him. B, A, or S, something like that. Whatever. I'm okay with that. He was insane to say the least. Scump is up next. Scump's interesting because I know some of you Optic fans will want him in the S tier, which in Respawn, I could see that. He's been insane. And question for me this year has been Search and Destroy. It's been a little bit inconsistent with Scump with how he plays in S&D. Some of these gunfights and some of the timings feel a little bit off with him, especially with the first bloods. He seems to be a little bit slower of a player than you'd think he should be inside of Search and Destroy, especially with how good we saw him be in S&D last year. It's like one of the top, 5 or 7 best S&D players last year. So overall, that's what I'm looking for Scump to get into the S tier. If he starts playing great in S&D, then suddenly he's a well-rounded top 5 type player in the league. So I'm gonna throw Scump in the A tier, and he's definitely near the top of that A tier for sure. Woo, speak of another gunny, Afro is up next. And guys, we are stacking the A tier here, but again, it's because we have a way smaller S tier than normal. I wanted to keep the S tier to 4 players. And so we're throwing Afro in the A tier. Again, one of the top players in the A tier. He is one of the best gunnies in the game. His slide cancels are as crisp as you get. I've done, again, learn from the pros on his movement and things on how he uses slide cancels. It's insane. And when he's in the right positionings, he's as hard to kill as anyone around the map. And you gotta respect that. Afro is a beast. One of the best slayers in the game for sure. So Nasty is up next, and I think the B tier makes a lot of sense for Nasty. He's a player who I really like how ratty he is, and his movement can be really, really cool. He can be an absolute menace in Search and Destroy. He can play great across all 3 game modes, but we haven't seen like the dominance from him since like the end of stage 1 type plays when London was at their best. So we'll leave Nasty there for now. Crim 6, I mean, Fat Man is up next. Ooh, Sig6 himself. I think look at this little spot right here. I mean, this is the spot for Crim. Right in the B tier. I think his S&D has been really fun this year. Finding those first bloods, gets the damage in Respawn. I want to see his teammates utilize that a little bit better, and maybe it's just because he's playing some longer lines of sight and it hasn't been as effective, but I really do like the prospects of Crim 6 in this game. As the main AR for this team, New York's gonna be really interesting, especially after maybe some roster changes here. I'm excited to see what Crim and that squad can do moving forward in stage 3. Then we got Zero. He's right up here near the A tier and B tier. The stage 2 major was a little bit tougher for him, not his best Call of Duty to say the least. After how good he was in stage 1 and the stage 1 major, where he was like an absolute dominant unit. Control's weird for me with Zero, and sometimes you can play a little bit slow and Search and Destroy. So after stage 1, I was hyped on him, and now I'm a little bit more hesitant, but we'll see what happens. I'll keep him in the A tier for now, but we'll just have to see. I can also see an argument for him dropping down into B as well. I wouldn't mind that. So the last player is Capsidal. Control is the question mark here, because we've seen him be a beast in Search and Destroy. I mean, he's an S&D unit. And then we've also seen him be very, very good in Hardpoint as well. Control's where he's had a lot of problems. Lucky for Boston, Tish has been able to really balance that out a little bit and become that playmaker for them in that game mode. So he's on the fringe of A and B. I think by next tier list, he'll be inside A. For now, I'm gonna put him at the top of the B tier. He's the first player here. I love how Capsidal plays, and I wouldn't have any problem with having him in A, but it's already a pretty packed house up there with so many guys there. So I feel like it'd be a little bit too full if we had another guy there. So there it is, the tiers list. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, like this new format, and drop all your comments down below. Obviously, we'll have more videos coming out here on the channel, the podcast tomorrow. Regardless, check out the podcast from last week. Absolute banger still even right now. And check out my reaction to the stage 2 major. There was a lot of fun stuff in that one as well. Appreciate you guys for watching. Talk to you guys very soon. I'm out.